A terrified 8-year-old girl emerged from the thick fog, screaming that her older sister was trapped with a gang of violent thugs in an abandoned cabin, forcing a convoy of black luxury cars to slam on their brakes. She didn't know she had just blocked the path of Dante Falcone, a ruthless mafia boss, but instead of driving away, he led his heavily armed hitman into the dark woods to save the young woman, and now, the men who abducted these sisters are about to learn that the forest has a new apex predator. The fog had come in low that morning, rolling across the forest road like a living, breathing entity, suffocating all sound and turning the towering pines into looming black silhouettes that seemed to watch and wait, while the air reeked of damp earth and moss, carrying a cold that stunned the lungs. Absolute silence reigned until the little girl materialized from the mist like a fragile ghost, her clothes torn and streaked with mud that looked almost black in the dim morning light. She ran barefoot down the center of the road, her thin arms pumping frantically, her breath tearing from her chest in ragged gasps because she was running for her life, her bare feet slapping against the wet asphalt and leaving bloody prints that quickly vanished into the fog behind her. Her matted hair hung in tangled ropes across her face, and when she stumbled, catching her small, trembling body with bruised hands before pushing upright again, the sound echoed like a gunshot in the dead quiet. She ran until she saw them. 2 black luxury cars sitting in formation across both lanes, their engines idling with a deep, menacing purr of expensive machinery, with gleaming chrome and tinted windows that made them look as though they had been carved from shadow and cold steel. Without a second of hesitation, the little girl dashed straight toward these ruthless machines, her voice ripping from her throat in a raw, agonizing plea that shattered the morning stillness. "Help. Please, someone please help my sister." The echo of her scream hung in the heavy mist, swallowed slowly by the suffocating silence of the forest. For a long second, nothing happened. The tinted window of the lead car remained dark. Then, the heavy door clicked open. A man stepped out onto the damp asphalt with the unhurried, terrifying grace of a predator assessing its territory. Dante Falcone wore a tailored charcoal suit that seemed to absorb the dim light, his broad shoulders squared and his sharp, sculpted features entirely devoid of emotion. He was a man who commanded empires built on violence, a phantom of the underworld whose mere name made hardened criminals bleed from fear. Behind him, 3 more doors opened in synchronized, lethal precision. 4 massive men stepped into the mist, their hands casually resting over the bulges of concealed firearms beneath their jackets. They spread out without a single word being spoken, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and steel around their boss. Lily collapsed to her bruised knees just a few feet from Dante, her bloody feet leaving smeared prints on the road. Her chest heaved. Tears cut clean tracks through the grime on her pale cheeks. She looked up at the towering figure standing over her, her small hands clutching at the cold air. "They took Evelyn," she sobbed, her voice a fragile, broken thing. "They dragged us from our house. They locked her in a dark cabin in the woods. Please, you have to go right now." Dante looked down. His dark, cold eyes cataloged every detail with clinical precision. He noted the severe rope burn circling her fragile wrists, the deep scratches on her legs from tearing through briars, and the absolute, paralyzing terror shining in her wide eyes. By all logic, this was not his problem. His empire did not deal in random acts of charity. He had a meeting to attend, blood money to collect, and a rival faction to crush. But as he stared into the desperate, tear-soaked eyes of the little girl, a sudden, violent memory clawed its way up from the darkest depths of his mind. He saw another little girl, years ago, crying out for help in a world that refused to listen. He saw the sister he had failed to save when he was too weak, too young, and too powerless to stop the monsters. The muscles in his jaw ticked. The freezing air around him seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Dante did not kneel, nor did he offer a comforting touch. He simply held the child gaze with an intensity that demanded absolute truth. "How many men?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated with dangerous authority. Lily swallowed hard, trembling violently as the imposing men surrounded her. "5," she whispered. "Maybe 6. They had guns. They said they were going to hurt her because our dad owed them money." Dante tilted his head slightly. The child was not hysterical anymore. She was traumatized, functioning on pure survival instinct, yet sharp enough to deliver actionable intelligence. He shifted his gaze toward the impenetrable wall of trees. The fog there was so thick it looked like a gray ocean waiting to drown them. He raised one gloved hand. The idling engines of the luxury cars died instantly. His men closed in, their postures shifting from passive guard to active combat readiness. Dante looked at his most trusted lieutenant, a towering enforcer named Matteo. "Put her in the back seat," Dante commanded smoothly. "Turn up the heat. Lock the doors. If anyone approaches this vehicle who is not one of us, you put a bullet in their skull." Matteo nodded, stepping forward to scoop the exhausted child into his massive arms. Lily panicked for a brief second, kicking her bloody feet, but Matteo held her securely. "Where are you going?" she cried out, looking over Matteo broad shoulder at the mafia boss. "To collect a debt," Dante replied. His tone carried the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. Without another word, Dante unbuttoned his suit jacket and drew a sleek, suppressed pistol from his shoulder holster. The metallic click of the safety disengaging sounded exceptionally loud in the quiet morning. His 3 remaining hitmen mirrored the action, drawing their own weapons with practiced, deadly efficiency. They fell into a tactical diamond formation, with Dante taking the lead. They stepped off the asphalt and melted into the dense, fog-choked tree line. The forest immediately swallowed them whole, hiding their approach as they moved silently over the damp earth and decaying leaves. They were no longer businessmen in expensive suits. They were a pack of wolves catching the scent of blood, closing in on a cavern full of arrogant fools who had no idea that their lives had just been measured, judged, and brought to a violent end. Deep inside the suffocating embrace of the forest, the rotting wooden cabin smelled of decay, damp earth, and stale sweat. Evelyn Hayes sat slumped against a splintered support beam, her wrists bound tightly behind her back with coarse rope that bit into her raw skin with every ragged breath she took. Her entire body ached from the brutal struggle at her home hours ago, but her mind was entirely focused on the narrow, jagged hole near the floorboards on the far wall. The freezing mist drifted through that small opening, the exact spot where she had forcefully pushed her 8-year-old sister just moments before. "Run, Lily," Evelyn prayed silently in the dark. "Run and do not look back." The heavy thud of boots stomping across the wooden porch shattered the silence. Evelyn stiffened, pressing her spine harder against the wooden beam. The flimsy front door groaned loudly as it was kicked open, letting in a swirl of gray fog and the towering, foul-smelling presence of Marcus Kane. Marcus was a brutal enforcer for the local loan sharks, a man whose soul was as filthy as his unwashed clothes. He stepped into the dim cabin, closely followed by 3 of his hulking thugs. His cruel eyes immediately swept the shadowed corners of the small room. He stepped forward, his heavy boots making the floorboards shriek. "Where's the little rat?" Marcus growled, his voice thick with malice. Evelyn raised her head. Her beautiful face was marred by dirt and a dark bruise blooming along her cheekbone, but her eyes blazed with pure, unyielding defiance. "She is gone," Evelyn stated, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror gripping her throat. "She is far away from here, and you will never find her." Marcus let out a vicious curse. He lunged forward and grabbed Evelyn by the collar of her oversized, drab wool coat. He hauled her upward, ignoring her gasp of pain as the rough ropes pulled at her shoulder joints. He raised a heavy fist, fully intending to beat the answers out of her. But as he shook her violently, the cheap fabric of her coat snagged on a rusted nail protruding from the support beam. The thick material ripped open down the center. The heavy coat fell away from her shoulders, revealing the fitted silk blouse underneath. Evelyn had always worn baggy, unappealing clothes to hide herself, knowing that beauty in her impoverished, dangerous neighborhood was a curse. Now, illuminated by the pale light filtering through the open door, her striking, alluring features and graceful silhouette were impossible to ignore. Marcus stopped. His raised fist slowly lowered. The furious scowl on his scarred face melted into a sickening, predatory grin. He stared at her, his dark eyes trailing over her exposed neck and the frantic rise and fall of her chest. The air in the cabin suddenly felt infinitely thicker, heavy with a new, terrifying threat. "Well, look at what we have here," Marcus whispered, his breath reeking of cheap liquor and tobacco. "Arthur always said his oldest daughter was pretty, but I thought the old drunk was just trying to talk up his collateral. I did not realize he was hiding a masterpiece under all those ugly rags." Evelyn felt a wave of cold dread wash over her, far worse than the fear of death. She pulled back, trying to shrink away from his gaze, but the beam behind her offered no escape. One of the thugs near the door shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, the buyer is expecting both of them at the docks by midnight. We need to find the kid and deliver them to clear Arthur debt." Marcus did not even look at his subordinate. "Tell the buyer there was a complication with the little one," he ordered, stepping closer to Evelyn. "And tell him he will have to wait for the older sister. I am canceling the immediate transfer. I think I will collect some interest on Arthur debt first." He reached out, his dirty fingers trailing against her bruised cheek. Evelyn did not cower. Her survival instinct, honed by years of protecting Lily from their father's chaotic life, flared into a blinding rage. She snapped her head forward and sank her teeth viciously into his hand. Marcus roared in pain, pulling his bleeding hand back and delivering a brutal backhand across her face. Evelyn collapsed hard against the wooden floor, her vision spinning into a kaleidoscope of dark spots. The metallic taste of blood flooded her mouth. "Hold her down," Marcus shouted furiously to his men. Two thugs rushed forward, grabbing her arms and pinning her to the filthy floorboards. Evelyn fought like a wild animal. She kicked her legs, twisting and thrashing with every ounce of strength left in her exhausted body. Her fingers, bound tightly behind her back, frantically scraped across the debris-covered floor. She felt the sharp edge of a broken glass bottle hidden in the dirt. She gripped it tightly, the jagged edge slicing into her own palm, ready to strike the moment anyone got close enough. She knew she could not defeat four massive men. She knew this dark, rotting cabin might be her final resting place. But she refused to be a passive victim. She would scream, she would bleed, and she would make them fight for every single inch. Every second she kept them occupied was another second for Lily to disappear into the fog. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the nightmare to descend, praying that whoever her little sister found in that mist would show mercy. Marcus leaned closer, his foul breath washing over her face. Evelyn tightened her bleeding fingers around the jagged glass shard hidden beneath her body. She calculated the distance to his throat. She only needed one clear strike. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The two thugs holding her arms laughed, a cruel and ugly sound that bounced off the rotting walls. Then the universe shattered. The heavy wooden door did not just open. It exploded inward with a deafening crash, tearing completely free from its rusted iron hinges and slamming violently onto the dirt floor. A thick cloud of gray fog and splintered wood filled the narrow entrance. Out of the mist stepped a nightmare dressed in charcoal silk. Dante Falcone entered the cabin. He brought the freezing cold of the forest in with him, his presence so overwhelmingly dominant that the air in the small room instantly felt entirely unbreathable. His dark eyes swept the scene in a fraction of a second, registering the pinned woman, the torn clothes, and the terrified thugs. There were no warnings. There was no shouting. There was no negotiation. The three men in shark suits who flowed into the room behind Dante moved with the synchronized precision of apex predators. Before the thugs pinning Evelyn could even process the intrusion, too sharp, suppressed coughs of gunfire echoed in the tight space. The men holding Evelyn went completely rigid. Their grips vanished as they collapsed backward onto the wooden floor, dark poles rapidly expanding beneath them. The third thug, standing near the window, panicked and reached clumsily for a rusty pistol tucked into his waistband. One of Dante's trusted hitmen stepped forward with terrifying calm, grabbed the thug by the collar, and drove a combat knife deep into his chest. The man slid down the wall without making a single sound. It took less than 5 seconds. 3 men were dead. The transition from agonizing terror to absolute silence was so jarring that Evelyn forgot how to breathe. Marcus Kane was the only one left standing. The brutal enforcer stumbled backward, his face draining of all color as he recognized the man standing in front of him. His arrogant cruelty completely evaporated, replaced by raw, primal fear. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg or explain, but Dante did not grant him the luxury of words. Dante closed the distance between them with impossible speed. Marcus threw a desperate, wild punch. Dante casually deflected the heavy strike with his left forearm, his expression utterly bored, and drove his right fist directly into Marcus' throat. The sickening crunch of cartilage filled the quiet room. As Marcus choked and fell to his knees, gasping for air, Dante grabbed a fistful of his greasy hair and yanked his head back. Without a single flicker of emotion, Dante delivered a punishing strike to Marcus' face, shattering his nose and sending him crashing onto the dirt floor. Marcus lay there, a broken, bloody mess, twitching uncontrollably at the feet of the mafia boss. Evelyn pushed herself up into a sitting position, her whole body shaking violently. She still gripped the bloody glass shard in her right hand. She stared at the massacre around her, her mind struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of the violence. The men who had terrorized her, the monsters she thought were invincible, had been swatted away like insignificant insects. She looked up. Dante Falcone turned slowly to face her. He stood tall amidst the carnage, immaculate and unbothered, as if he had merely stepped on a roach. His dark eyes locked onto hers. Evelyn braced herself, expecting a new kind of pain. She raised her bleeding hand, pointing the jagged glass at him in a pathetic but defiant gesture of defense. Dante paused. His gaze drifted from her defiant, tear-streaked face down to the sharp glass in her trembling, bleeding hand. He noted the dark bruise blossoming on her cheekbone and the pale skin exposed by her torn coat. He did not see a broken victim. He saw a survivor holding a broken piece of glass against an army. Something shifted in his cold, impenetrable eyes. It was not pity. Pity was an insult. It was a silent acknowledgement of her spirit. Dante slowly reached up and unbuttoned his tailored charcoal suit jacket. He slipped it off his broad shoulders, revealing a crisp black shirt and the leather straps of his shoulder holster. He stepped over Marcus' ruined body and knelt gracefully on one knee in the dirt right in front of her. Evelyn flinched, shrinking back, but Dante did not reach for her throat. Instead, he gently draped the heavy, warm, expensive jacket over her trembling shoulders. The oversized garment swallowed her small frame, completely covering her torn clothes and hiding her exposed skin from the eyes of his men. The jacket smelled of rich cologne, cold mist, and the faint, sharp tang of gunpowder. "Drop the glass," he said. His voice was quiet, a deep baritone that rumbled in the small space, commanding yet strangely grounding. "You do not need it anymore." Evelyn stared into his dark, fathomless eyes. For the first time all night, the frantic hammering of her heart began to slow. Her fingers slowly uncurled. The bloody piece of glass fell to the dirt floor with a soft thud. Dante stood up seamlessly. He looked at one of his men standing quietly by the door. "Pick her up," Dante ordered calmly. "We are leaving." As the massive hitman approached her with careful, non-threatening movements, Evelyn realized a terrifying truth. The man who had just saved her life was infinitely more dangerous than the man who had tried to destroy it. She had survived the wolves, only to be claimed by the devil himself. The massive hitman extended his hands toward Evelyn, moving with surprising caution for a man of his size. But as his shadow fell over her, the last remnants of her adrenaline finally shattered. Evelyn flinched violently, instinctively pulling away from the touch of another violent stranger. She pressed her bleeding hands against the dirt floor and forced her trembling legs to bear her weight. She managed to stand for exactly 2 seconds. Then the world tilted violently, the edges of her vision turning pitch black. Her knees buckled beneath her. She did not hit the ground. Before the hitman could react, Dante stepped forward and caught her. His strong arms wrapped securely around her fragile frame, effortlessly absorbing her dead weight. Evelyn's head fell against his chest, her senses flooded with the scent of his expensive cologne and the rough texture of his shirt. She tried to keep her eyes open, tried to hold on to the defiant spark that had kept her alive, but exhaustion pulled her under. She slipped into deep, dreamless unconsciousness, completely surrendering to the dark embrace of the mafia boss. Dante adjusted his grip, lifting her easily into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, yet she carried a heavy, undeniable presence. He looked at the unconscious woman resting against his chest, her pale face partially hidden by the lapels of his oversized charcoal jacket. He then turned his cold gaze to the carnage surrounding them. The 3 dead thugs lay motionless in growing pools of crimson. Marcus Kane was still unconscious on the floor, his face a ruined mask of blood and shattered bone. "Burn it," Dante commanded softly. "Leave absolutely nothing behind." His men moved with practiced efficiency. One of the hitmen pulled a silver flask from his coat, unscrewed the cap, and began pouring the highly flammable chemical accelerant over the wooden floorboards, the decaying walls, and the bodies of the fallen men. The pungent stench of the chemical quickly overpowered the smell of damp earth and copper. Dante did not wait to watch the spark ignite. He turned his back on the rotting structure and stepped out into the freezing mist, carrying Evelyn away from the nightmare. The walk back through the dense woods was silent and swift. Dante navigated the uneven terrain with predatory grace, his boots making almost no sound against the damp forest floor. He held Evelyn securely against his chest, shielding her from the biting cold and the sharp, clawing branches of the towering pines. Behind them, a sudden, explosive whoosh echoed through the trees. A brilliant orange glow blossomed in the distance, tearing through the thick gray fog. The abandoned cavern was consumed by a raging inferno, the flames licking the sky and erasing every trace of the violence that had just occurred. The fire would consume the wood, the blood, and the bodies, leaving only ash for the morning dew to wash away. They emerged from the dark tree line and stepped back onto the wet asphalt. The convoy of black luxury cars sat exactly where they had left them, engines purring softly in the heavy mist. Standing beside the open rear door of the lead vehicle was Matteo, his massive frame shielding the small, trembling figure of Lily. The little girl's eyes were wide and red from crying. When she saw Dante emerge from the shadows carrying her sister's motionless body, a piercing, heartbroken wail tore from her throat. "Evelyn!" Lily screamed, breaking away from Matteo and running on her bruised, bare feet toward the mafia boss. Dante stopped. He looked down at the hysterical child clawing at his dark trousers. Her tiny hands grasped the fabric desperately as she stared at her sister's pale, bruising face. "Is she dead?" Lily sobbed uncontrollably, her entire body shaking with absolute terror. "Did they kill her?" "She is just sleeping," Dante stated, his deep voice cutting through her panic with calm, immovable authority. "She fought hard. Now she needs to rest. I gave you my word that I would find her. She is safe." Lily choked on a sob, her trembling hands reaching up to touch Evelyn's dirty, tangled hair. The child let out a long, ragged breath, the paralyzing fear finally beginning to drain from her exhausted body. Matteo stepped forward and gently guided Lily back toward the vehicle. Dante followed, carefully lowering Evelyn onto the plush leather seats of the back row. He made sure his suit jacket remained securely wrapped around her before stepping back to let Lily scramble inside. The little girl immediately curled up beside her sister, burying her face into Evelyn's shoulder and holding onto her with a desperate, unyielding grip. Dante closed the heavy car door, sealing them inside the warm, armored sanctuary. He walked around to the other side and slid into the adjacent seat. The interior of the vehicle was silent except for Lily's quiet sniffles and Evelyn's shallow, steady breathing. "Drive," Dante ordered the driver. The convoy of sleek black cars glided forward, picking up speed as they left the desolate forest road behind. Dante looked out the tinted window. In the side mirror, he could see the angry orange flames of the burning cavern rising high above the tree line, a blazing beacon of destruction in the cold gray morning. He turned his attention back to the two sisters sleeping in the darkness of his car. The terrified little girl and the beautiful, defiant woman had nowhere else to go. The car sped toward the heavily fortified Falcone estate, carrying Evelyn away from her impoverished nightmare and directly into the heart of the underworld. Consciousness returned to Evelyn slowly, filtering through a thick haze of exhaustion and lingering terror. The first thing she noticed was the absence of the biting cold. Instead of damp earth and rotting wood beneath her battered body, she felt the incredible softness of high-thread count linen and a plush mattress. The foul stench of alcohol, sweat, and decay had been replaced by the faint, clinical scent of antiseptic and clean lavender. She opened her heavy eyelids. Soft, muted sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, illuminating a sprawling, immaculate room that looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a medical facility. State-of-the-art monitors hummed quietly in the corner, though she was not hooked up to them. Her torn clothes were gone, replaced by a soft, oversized silk nightgown. There were fresh, white bandages wrapped meticulously around her wrists and the deep cut on her palm. The memories of the burning cavern and the monstrous men came crashing back with violent force. Evelyn gasped, her heart rate spiking instantly. She threw off the thick comforter and forced herself to sit up, ignoring the sharp protest of her bruised muscles. "Lily," she rasped, her throat incredibly dry. Panic seized her lungs as she frantically scanned the unfamiliar, opulent room. Then she saw her. Across the spacious room, curled beneath a thick woolen blanket on a massive velvet sofa, was Lily. The 8-year-old girl was sleeping soundly, her chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Her face had been washed clean of dirt and blood, and she wore a pristine cotton shirt that swallowed her tiny frame. Evelyn let out a shuddering breath, a profound wave of relief washing away the terrifying ice in her veins. Only then did Evelyn notice the giant sitting in the leather armchair near the door. It was Matteo, the massive hitman who had carried Lily into the car. In the daylight, his imposing size was even more intimidating. He wore a dark suit, his broad shoulders easily dwarfing the large chair. Yet, in his massive, scarred hands, he held a small, delicate teacup, sitting absolutely motionless so as not to wake the sleeping child. When he saw Evelyn sit up, he gave her a single, silent nod of acknowledgement. Before Evelyn could find her voice to speak to the giant, the heavy mahogany door opened with a quiet click. Dante Falcone stepped into the room. The sheer force of his presence instantly sucked the warmth from the air. He was dressed flawlessly in a midnight blue suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his dark hair combed back with meticulous precision. He looked like royalty, but his cold, obsidian eyes belonged to a predator. He stepped into the light, radiating a terrifying, absolute authority that made Evelyn hold her breath. Matteo immediately set his teacup down, stood up, and left the room without a single word, closing the heavy door securely behind him. The sudden silence left Evelyn entirely alone with the man who had slaughtered 3 thugs without blinking. Evelyn instinctively pulled the comforter up to her chest, a useless shield against his piercing gaze. Dante stopped a few feet from the edge of the bed. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply observed her, taking in the pale pallor of her skin and the defensive posture of her slender frame. "You slept for 14 hours, Dante stated. His voice was a deep, velvet rumble that resonated in the quiet room. "The doctor assured me you suffered no internal bleeding, only severe contusions and exhaustion. Your sister is entirely unharmed." Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to summon the defiant fire that had kept her alive in the cabin. "Thank you," she whispered, hating how fragile she sounded. "Thank you for saving her. For saving both of us. But I need to know where we are. Who are you?" Dante tilted his head slightly, his expression remaining perfectly blank. "You are inside my private estate, safely hidden behind reinforced walls and armed guards. As for who I am, you already know I am not a savior. I am the man who burns the wolves." "I know you killed those men," Evelyn said, her voice growing slightly stronger as she pushed past the fear. "I know you are part of the underworld. But my father owed a debt to Marcus Kane. If Marcus is dead, the debt is gone. We need to leave. We cannot stay in a place like this." She made a move to slip out of the bed, but Dante took one step forward. The subtle shift in his posture was enough to freeze her in place. "Marcus Kane is not dead," Dante corrected coldly. "He survived the fire. And even if he had burned to ash, Marcus was merely a rabid dog on a leash. The man holding that leash is a cartel boss who controls the Southern District. Your father did not just borrow money. He sold your location, your friends, and your entire life to men who view you as nothing more than profitable merchandise. If you walk out of those gates right now, you and your sister will not survive the night. The police cannot protect you from them. No one can." Evelyn stared at him, the horrifying reality of his words sinking like heavy stones into her stomach. Her father had truly doomed them completely. She looked over at Lily, still sleeping peacefully, entirely unaware of the monstrous world closing in around them. "Then what do we do?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain strong. "What do you want from us? Men like you do not save girls like me out of the goodness of their hearts." Dante's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, towering over her, his imposing shadow falling across the bed. "I do not have a heart, Miss Hayes," he said quietly. "But I have rules. And my rules dictate that I do not allow filthy animals to touch things that belong in my territory. You are alive because I willed it. You are safe because my men are standing outside that door." Evelyn felt a shiver race down her spine. He was not offering her freedom. He was offering her survival under his terms. "You are forbidden from leaving this estate," Dante commanded, delivering the ultimatum with absolute finality. "You will remain inside this house until I decide the threat is eradicated. You will have food, medical care, and everything your sister requires. But you will not step foot outside my gates. Do you understand?" Evelyn looked around the opulent, sunlit room. It was beautiful, warm, and safe. But as she looked back into the cold, possessive eyes of Dante Falcone, she realized the terrifying truth. She had escaped a rotting wooden cage only to be locked inside a cage of flawless, bulletproof glass. And the devil holding the key was standing right in front of her. "I understand," she whispered softly, accepting the dangerous terms of her new reality. Dante turned toward the heavy mahogany door, his message delivered and the boundaries of her new reality firmly set. He expected tears, perhaps silent resignation, or even a desperate plea for mercy. But as his hand touched the brass handle, the soft rustle of silk sheets made him pause. "Wait," Evelyn said. Her voice was no longer a fragile whisper. It carried a sudden, sharp edge of determination. Dante looked over his shoulder. Evelyn had pushed the thick comforter aside completely. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. She gripped the edge of the mattress to steady herself, her knuckles turning white beneath the fresh bandages, refusing to let her bruised body dictate her spirit. "I understand that we are trapped here," she began, forcing herself to meet his piercing, obsidian eyes without flinching. "And I understand that you saved our lives. But I refuse to be a helpless burden. I will not sit in a gilded cage and wait for you to solve my problems. If my father sold my life to the underworld, then I have a debt, and I intend to pay it." Dante turned fully around, leaning slightly against the doorframe. He crossed his arms over his broad chest, a gesture of mild, dangerous curiosity. "You have absolutely nothing of value to offer me, Miss Hayes. You are a civilian. My world operates on currencies you cannot possibly comprehend." Evelyn lifted her chin, her beautiful features hardening with quiet, fierce pride. "I am an architect and a structural designer," she stated clearly. "I have spent the last 6 years analyzing blueprints, designing layouts, and finding structural vulnerabilities. I know how to spot weaknesses in security grids. I know how to design front companies that look flawless on paper. I can draft, I can plan, and I can analyze data faster than any of your thugs." The room fell completely silent. Dante stared at her, genuinely analyzing the woman standing before him. He was accustomed to people offering him loyalty born of terror, or women offering him their bodies in exchange for luxury and protection. Evelyn was offering him her intellect. She was standing in a silk nightgown, battered and bruised, demanding a job in a mafia syndicate to buy her own sister freedom. It was absurd. It was reckless. And it was incredibly intriguing. "You want to work for the Falcone family," Dante murmured, his deep voice carrying a dark, amused undertone. "You want to look at my blueprints and optimize my secure locations." "I want to earn our keep," Evelyn corrected sharply. "I want to pay off whatever imaginary number my father owes your rivals, and I want to reimburse you for your protection. Keep a ledger. Deduct my wages. When the balance is 0, Lily and I will disappear from your life forever." A muscle ticked in Dante's jaw. He stepped away from the door, closing the distance between them until he was standing just inches away. He reached out, his leather-gloved finger gently lifting her chin, forcing her to maintain eye contact. "You are playing a very dangerous game, Evelyn," he whispered softly. "If you look at my files, you become part of the organization. And nobody leaves the organization." "I am already part of this nightmare," she replied, refusing to look away. "Give me a laptop and a secure connection. Test me." Before Dante could deliver his final verdict, a soft, sleepy voice drifted across the room. "Are you fighting?" Dante dropped his hand and turned his head. On the velvet sofa, Lily was rubbing her eyes. The little girl tossed aside her woolen blanket and slid to the floor. Her bare feet padded softly across the room. She bypassed Evelyn entirely and walked straight up to the towering, terrifying mafia boss. Dante froze. For a man who could orchestrate city-wide gang wars and execute traitors without a second thought, the sudden proximity of a sleepy 8-year-old girl completely paralyzed him. Lily tilted her head back, looking up at his sharp, emotionless face. She reached out with her tiny, bruised hand and grabbed the expensive fabric of his midnight blue suit jacket. "You came back," Lily said, her voice filled with absolute, innocent certainty. "You beat up the bad monsters and carried Evelyn out of the fire." Dante looked down at her small hand, clutching his suit. He did not know how to respond. He was a monster himself, a predator bathed in blood, yet this child looked at him as if he wore shining armor. "You are our knight," Lily declared softly, a sleepy smile touching her lips. "Thank you for rescuing us." The heavy mahogany door clicked open slightly, and Matteo peered inside, likely checking on the sudden noise. The giant hitman eyes widened in absolute shock as he witnessed the most feared man in the city standing rigidly still while a child tugged on his clothes. Dante swallowed hard. The suffocating ice that encased his heart felt a sudden, unfamiliar crack. He awkwardly reached out and placed his large hand on top of Lily's head for a brief, fleeting second. "Go back to sleep, little one," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its lethal edge. He looked up, his dark eyes locking with Evelyn across the space between them. The tension in the room had shifted, transformed by the innocent faith of a child. Dante gave Evelyn a single, calculating nod. "I will send Matteo with a laptop and 3 encrypted architectural files in 1 hour," Dante said to Evelyn. "Find the structural flaws in those safe houses by tomorrow morning. If you succeed, we will discuss your ledger. If you fail, you remain a guest in my cage." He turned and walked out of the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, leaving Evelyn with a racing heart and a dangerous new contract for her survival. True to his word, Matteo had delivered a heavy, encrypted laptop to the medical suite exactly 60 minutes after Dante left. Evelyn did not waste a single second. Despite the throbbing pain in her ribs and the heavy bandages wrapping her wrists, she sat cross-legged on the plush bed, her eyes scanning the complex architectural blueprints glowing on the high-resolution screen. She found 3 critical vulnerabilities in the first safe house within 2 hours. There was a massive blind spot in the security camera grid near the southern ventilation shaft, a fatal structural weakness in the reinforced basement ceiling, and a predictable escape route that could easily be bottlenecked by an organized assault team. She typed her analysis with fierce, relentless determination. She was fighting a brutal war for her survival with the only weapons she possessed. 2 floors below her, the atmosphere inside Dante Falcone's sprawling mahogany office was as suffocating as a sealed tomb. Dante stood silently by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the manicured grounds of his impenetrable estate. A glass of expensive amber whiskey sat untouched on his desk. The heavy oak door opened with a sharp click. Matteo stepped into the room, his massive frame rigid with an unusual, vibrating tension. The giant hitman did not bring a calming presence this time. He brought the scent of cold rain, ash, and impending violence. "We have a massive problem, boss," Matteo stated, his deep voice entirely devoid of its usual steady calm. The cleanup crew finished sweeping the forest perimeter. They found 3 bodies burned to ash inside the cavern ruins just as he ordered. But they also found a blood trail leading away from the rear foundation. It was fresh. Dante slowly turned around. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet instantly. "Marcus Kane," Dante said softly, the name tasting like poison on his tongue. Matteo nodded grimly. He must have crawled out through the rotting floorboards right before the chemical accelerant caught the main support beams. "Our inside contacts in the Southern District confirmed the situation 10 minutes ago." Kane stumbled into an underground cartel clinic with 3rd-degree burns and a crushed windpipe. He survived just long enough to whisper your name to his superiors. "The cartel boss knows you interfered with their collection. He knows you slaughtered his men and took the women." Dante walked slowly toward his desk and placed his hands flat against the polished wood. The Southern Cartel was a reckless, heavily armed syndicate driven by greed and narcotics. They did not respect the traditional, disciplined boundaries of the underworld that the Falcone family maintained. If they knew Dante had stolen their valuable collateral, they would retaliate violently to protect their brutal reputation. "There is more," Matteo continued, his heavy jaw clenching tight. "We intercepted a secure communication from the cartel lieutenants. They are currently mobilizing hit squads. But they are not just aiming their weapons at our borders." "Explain," Dante commanded, his dark, obsidian eyes narrowing into lethal slits. "It is Arthur Hayes," Matteo replied, his tone dripping with absolute, unadulterated disgust. "The girl's father. Before Kane took the sisters to the cavern last night, the cartel tortured the old drunk for extra insurance. Arthur broke immediately. He gave them everything. He did not just sell his daughters to clear his gambling debts. He gave the cartel the names, home addresses, and workplaces of Evelyn's closest friends and former colleagues. The cartel is planning to round all of them up tonight. They intend to torture innocent civilians and send the bloody pieces to our gates to force Evelyn out of hiding. Silence descended upon the grand office, heavy and absolute. Dante stared at the flickering shadows dancing across his mahogany desk. A father had systematically doomed his own flesh and blood, her little sister, and everyone she had ever cared about, all to save his own pathetic skin. Dante thought of Evelyn upstairs, currently pouring her brilliant, exhausted mind into securing his territory, fighting desperately to buy her freedom. He thought of little Lily, who had looked up at a ruthless monster and called him a knight. They had been dragged into a merciless bloodbath by the very man who was supposed to shield them from the dark. The faint, unfamiliar crack that Lily had formed in his ice-cold heart did not make Dante any softer. It made his inherent cruelty sharper, more focused, and infinitely more terrifying. He was a creature of absolute control, and the Southern Cartel had just threatened the sanctity of his fortress. They had threatened the people he now considered under his protection. They had crossed a line that could only be washed away with a flood of blood. Dante walked over to the hidden glass display cabinet on the far wall. He opened it and retrieved a sleek, matte black tactical rifle, checking the chamber with practiced, mechanical precision. "Call the elite strike teams," Dante ordered, his voice dropping to a terrifying, hollow whisper that promised absolute destruction. "Lock down the entire estate. Nobody enters or leaves this property without my direct authorization. Put 4 extra heavily armed guards outside the medical suite. If a single shadow crosses that hallway, I will personally skin the man responsible." Matteo straightened his posture, immediately recognizing the lethal shift in his boss. "And the cartel squads targeting the civilian friends?" Matteo asked, his hand already reaching for his encrypted phone. Dante loaded a fresh magazine into the rifle, the sharp metallic snap ringing clearly through the quiet room. "We intercept them," Dante replied coldly. "We do not play defense, Matteo. We are going to remind the Southern District why they fear the dark. I want the exact location of Arthur Hayes. I want the coordinates of the cartel staging grounds. Tonight, we tear their entire operation out by the roots." The freezing rain began to fall just as the convoy of armored vehicles slipped through the reinforced steel gates of the Falcone estate. Dante sat in the back of the lead car, his expression carved from stone, his customized tactical rifle resting heavily across his knees. He had left Evelyn surrounded by a fortress of armed guards, ensuring that the beautiful, defiant woman and her little sister were entirely unreachable. Now he was descending into the filthy underbelly of the city to eradicate the disease that threatened them. Their first destination was an illegal, underground gambling den located on the rotting edge of the Southern District. It was a miserable, suffocating basement operation filled with the stench of cheap cigars, spilled beer, and desperate men. This was the exact place where Arthur Hayes had traded his own flesh and blood for a few more hours at the card tables. The infiltration was silent and absolute. Dante men did not bother with the front door. They slipped through the loading docks, neutralizing the cartel lookouts with lethal precision. Within 3 minutes, the heavy steel doors of the underground casino were locked from the inside. The blaring music was abruptly cut off. The dim overhead lights flared to full brightness, exposing the filthy reality of the room. Panic rippled through the crowded basement as heavily armed hitmen in tactical gear surrounded the gambling tables. Dante walked down the concrete stairs, his tailored midnight suit contrasting sharply with the tactical vests of his enforcers. The sea of patrons parted instantly, stepping back in absolute terror as they recognized the apex predator of the city underworld. Dante did not look at the dealers or the frightened gamblers. His dark, cold eyes locked onto a pathetic figure shivering near the back wall. Arthur Hayes was a hollow shell of a man, his face flushed with cheap bourbon and week-old stubble. He was clutching a handful of dirty casino chips, his eyes wide with a coward realization that death had finally come to collect. He tried to scramble backward, bumping into a brick pillar, but Matteo stepped forward and grabbed him by the collar, dragging him effortlessly across the room and tossing him onto a clearing by the center poker table. Arthur fell hard onto his knees, whimpering as the remaining casino patrons were forcefully herded out of the back exit by the strike team. Within moments, the massive basement was entirely empty except for Dante, his closest lieutenants, and the trembling father. "Please," Arthur begged, his voice cracking as he looked up at the towering mafia boss. "I do not have the money yet. I swear I am winning it back. Kane gave me an extension." Dante stepped closer, looking down at the miserable creature with absolute, unadulterated disgust. "You sold your eldest daughter to monsters to cover a debt," Dante stated, his deep voice echoing coldly off the concrete walls. "You allowed your youngest daughter to be dragged into a dark forest to be slaughtered. And when the cartel demanded more, you gave them the names of innocent civilians. You sold Evelyn friends just to buy yourself another glass of whiskey." Arthur's face drained of all color. He trembled violently, raising his hands in a desperate plea. "They tortured me," he cried out, tears streaming down his grimy face. "I had no choice. They were going to kill me. You have to understand, I am a sick man. I am their father. I had to survive so I could find a way to save them." "You are a parasite," Dante corrected smoothly. "And you cease being their father the moment you put a price tag on their lives." Dante signaled with a brief tilt of his head. Two massive enforcers stepped forward, grabbing Arthur by the shoulders and dragging him upward. They slammed him face first onto the green felt of the poker table, pulling his arms forward and pinning his wrists flat against the surface. Arthur screamed, thrashing wildly, but he could not break the iron grip of the hitmen. Dante unbuttoned his suit jacket, walking slowly toward the table. Evelyn would not want her father dead, no matter how profoundly he had betrayed her. She carried a quiet, beautiful light in her soul, and Dante would not burden her conscience with the murder of her own blood. But underworld law demanded absolute retribution. A debt of suffering had to be paid. Dante picked up a heavy, solid brass chip rake from the edge of the table. He looked down at Arthur's trembling, sweaty hands. These were the hands that rolled the dice. These were the hands that held the cards. These were the hands that signed away the lives of Evelyn and Lily. "I am not going to kill you, Arthur," Dante said softly, raising the heavy brass rod. "But I am going to ensure that you never sit at a gambling table again." Arthur shrieked in absolute terror just as Dante brought the brass rod down with terrifying, calculated force. The sickening sound of shattering bone echoed loudly through the empty casino. Arthur let out an agonizing, blood-curdling scream that tore his vocal cords. Dante did not stop. He struck again, systematically crushing the fingers and knuckles of the man's right hand, destroying the delicate joints necessary to hold a deck of cards or grip a glass of liquor. He then moved to the left hand, delivering the same brutal, precise punishment. When Dante finally dropped the bloody brass rod onto the floor, Arthur was sobbing uncontrollably, his ruined hands resting uselessly on the torn green felt of the poker table. "Listen to me very carefully," Dante commanded, grabbing the back of Arthur's hair and pulling his face up so their eyes met. "You are going to walk out of this city tonight. You will never contact Evelyn again. You will never look for Lily. You have no daughters. You have no family. If you ever cross the state line, or if I ever hear that you spoke their names, I will find you, and I will not be this merciful." Arthur could only nod weakly, choking on his own tears and the agonizing pain radiating from his shattered hands. Dante let go of the man's hair in disgust, turning his back on the pathetic creature. "Throw him in the back of a transport van," Dante ordered Matteo. "Drive him 300 miles north and dump him in the snow." As the enforcers dragged the sobbing, broken man out of the basement, Dante checked the magazine of his tactical rifle one more time. The first phase of his retribution was complete. The past that tied Evelyn to her misery had been severed. Now he had to deal with the future. "Where are the cartel staging grounds?" Dante asked, his eyes hardening into twin voids of obsidian. 3 miles away, in the abandoned shipping yards, Matteo replied, his hand resting on his weapon. "They are gearing up to hit the civilian targets within the hour." "Tell the men to get back in the cars," Dante commanded, walking toward the concrete stairs. "Tonight, We burn the Southern cartel to the ground. The freezing rain had escalated into a torrential downpour by the time Dante's heavily armored convoy arrived at the edge of the abandoned shipping yards. Towering stacks of rusted metal containers formed a labyrinth of cold steel and deep shadows, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of failing sodium lights. This was the staging ground. In the center of the sprawling yard, dozens of cartel thugs were loading heavy crates of automatic weapons into unmarked vans, preparing to hunt down the innocent civilians on Arthur Hayes' list. They never got the chance to start their engines. Dante stepped out of his vehicle, the torrential rain instantly slicking his dark hair and soaking the shoulders of his tailored suit. He raised his tactical rifle. That single motion was the only command his elite strike team needed. The assault was a masterclass in calculated, overwhelming violence. Snipers positioned on the surrounding crane towers eliminated the cartel lookouts in perfect synchronicity. The sharp, suppressed coughs of high-caliber rifles were entirely drowned out by the roaring thunder. Then, Dante men flooded the yard from all sides, moving like lethal phantoms through the freezing storm. Panic erupted among the cartel soldiers. They scrambled for their weapons, shouting wildly over the torrential rain, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Dante marched directly into the chaos, his posture completely rigid, his face in a motionless mask of cold fury. He fired with surgical precision, dropping enemy after enemy without breaking his steady, predatory stride. Bullets ricocheted off the rusted shipping containers around him, sending sparks flying into the dark sky, but Dante did not even flinch. He was the devil walking through his own personal inferno, and he was searching for a very specific demon. Matteo flanked him, his massive heavy machine gun tearing through the remaining cartel defenses. Within 10 minutes, the staging ground was transformed into a graveyard. The vans were riddled with bullet holes, and the wet ground ran red, the blood washing away into the storm drains. The Southern cartel offensive had been completely eradicated before it even began. But Dante was not finished. He handed his rifle to Matteo and drew his suppressed pistol, walking slowly toward a rusted warehouse at the very edge of the deep water docks. The heavy metal door was slightly ajar. Dante kicked it open, stepping into the cavernous, damp darkness. At the far end of the warehouse, desperately trying to pry open a rusted emergency exit, was Marcus Kane. The brutal enforcer looked like a walking corpse. The left side of his face and neck was covered in raw, weeping burns from the cabin fire. He gasped for air through his crushed windpipe, his movements clumsy and panicked. When he heard the slow, deliberate echo of Dante's footsteps on the concrete floor, Marcus froze. He turned around, his eyes wide with absolute, primal terror. He drew a pistol with a shaking hand and fired blindly into the shadows. The bullet hit a metal pillar 10 feet away. Dante did not stop walking. He raised his own weapon and fired 2 rapid shots. The first bullet shattered Marcus' right kneecap. The second obliterated his left. Marcus shrieked, a wet, gargling sound that tore from his ruined throat and collapsed heavily onto the cold concrete. He dropped his weapon, clutching his shattered legs as dark blood pooled rapidly around him. Dante walked up to the writhing man and kicked the discarded gun into the shadows. "Please," Marcus gasped, choking on his own blood as he looked up at the towering mafia boss. "I was just following orders. It was just business." Dante knelt down, his pristine suit soaking up the dirty water from the floor. He grabbed Marcus by the collar, dragging him upward until they were inches apart. "You touched her," Dante whispered, his voice colder than the freezing rain outside. "You looked at Evelyn, you tore her clothes, and you made her bleed. You terrorized an 8-year-old girl to the point where she had to run barefoot through a dark forest begging for her life. That is not business. That is a disease. And I am the cure." Dante dragged the screaming, broken man across the warehouse floor, pulling him out into the violent storm. He hauled Marcus toward the edge of the docks, right beneath a towering, mechanized cargo crane. A massive, rusted shipping container hung suspended by thick iron chains 20 feet above the churning, black water of the bay. Matteo and 2 other hitmen were already waiting. They grabbed Marcus, ignoring his desperate, gargling pleas, and dragged him to the absolute edge. Dante pressed a button on the industrial control console. The heavy steel doors of the suspended shipping container slowly groaned open, revealing absolute, pitch-black emptiness inside. "You like trapping women in dark, rotting boxes," Dante said smoothly, walking up to the edge of the dock. "You enjoy watching them suffocate with fear. Now you will understand exactly how that feels." Matteo hauled Marcus upward and threw him violently inside the hanging steel container. Marcus hit the rusted floor, screaming in agony as his shattered legs took the severe impact. He tried to drag himself back toward the open doors, his bloody hands desperately scraping against the cold metal, his burned face twisted in sheer horror. "No, please no," Marcus screamed, the realization of his terrible fate fully sinking in. "I will do anything. I will tell you everything about the cartel. Please do not close the doors." "You have nothing left to say," Dante replied, his face completely devoid of mercy. Dante hit the heavy red switch on the control panel. The massive steel doors of the container slammed shut with a deafening metallic boom, sealing Marcus Kane in absolute, impenetrable darkness. The lock engaged heavily. From inside, the muffled, frantic screams and the sound of bloody fists pounding against thick steel echoed faintly over the storm. Dante reached for the main crane lever. He looked at the suspended steel coffin for one long, silent second, feeling the ghosts of Evelyn terror and Lily tears finally being put to rest. He pulled the lever down. The thick iron chains released violently. The massive shipping container plummeted 20 feet, crashing into the freezing, dark waters of the bay with a massive splash. It bobbed on the violent surface for a few agonizing seconds as the heavy metal rapidly filled with freezing water. Then it sank. It disappeared entirely beneath the black waves, dragging Marcus Kane down to the crushing depths, burying his cruelty at the bottom of the ocean forever. Dante stood in the freezing rain, watching the black water settle. The debt of blood was fully paid. The nuclear revenge was complete. He turned his back on the ocean and walked toward his waiting vehicle, his mind already shifting from the monsters he had destroyed to the woman waiting for him in his fortress. Dawn broke over the Falcone estate, casting a pale, bruised light across the manicured lawns. The torrential storm had finally passed, leaving behind a cold, heavy mist that clung to the stone walls. The armored convoy rolled silently through the iron gates, tires hissing on the wet pavement. Dante stepped out of the lead vehicle. He looked like a god of war returning from a brutal crusade. His tailored suit was ruined, soaked through with freezing rain and stained with the dark, unmistakable spray of arterial blood. A jagged bullet graze tore across his left bicep, the fabric of his shirt torn and clinging to his skin, though he seemed entirely impervious to the pain. The lethal, suffocating aura surrounding him was so intense that even his most hardened enforcers kept a cautious distance. He entered the grand foyer of the mansion, his heavy boots leaving faint, dark tracks on the pristine marble floor. Matteo walked a few paces behind, quietly dismissing the night shift guards. Dante intended to go straight to his private quarters to wash the scent of death from his skin. He did not want Evelyn to see him like this. He did not want the fragile, beautiful woman to look upon the absolute monster he truly was. But as he reached the top of the grand staircase, he stopped. Evelyn was standing in the center of the dimly lit hallway. She wore the same oversized silk nightgown, her arms wrapped tightly around herself to ward off the morning chill. She had been waiting for him. Her eyes swept over his towering, intimidating frame, taking in the ruined suit, the blood dripping from his knuckles, and the terrifying, hollow void in his dark eyes. The violent reality of what he had done during the night was painted clearly across his body. One of the heavily armed guards stationed near the medical suite immediately stepped forward, raising a hand to gently but firmly block Evelyn Tath. "Please return to your room, Miss Hayes," the guard murmured anxiously. "The boss needs space. It is not safe right now." "Stand down," Dante commanded. His voice was a raw, gravelly rasp that echoed off the high ceiling. The guard instantly stepped back, lowering his head. Dante remained frozen in place, his muscles coiled tight. He expected Evelyn to run. He expected her to look at the blood soaking his sleeves and finally realize that she had traded one nightmare for an even darker hell. Instead, Evelyn turned around and walked back into the medical suite. Dante felt a strange, hollow ache in his chest, assuming she was fleeing from the sight of him. But a few seconds later, she reappeared. She was holding a small, white medical kit in her bandaged hands. She walked directly toward him. "Do not come any closer, Evelyn," Dante warned, his voice low and dangerous. "I am covered in filth. I am covered in the blood of men who will never see the sun again. You should be terrified of me." Evelyn did not stop. She closed the distance between them until she was standing just inches from his blood-stained chest. She looked up into his cold, obsidian eyes, her own gaze completely devoid of fear. "I am terrified of many things," she replied softly. "I am terrified of the man who tried to sell my sister. I am terrified of the world that turned a blind eye when we screamed for help. But I am not terrified of you." She reached out. Her small, trembling fingers grasped the lapels of his ruined suit jacket and gently pushed it off his broad shoulders. Dante stood entirely rigid, his breath catching in his throat as she unbuttoned his torn, bloodied shirt, exposing the muscular expanse of his chest and the angry, bleeding graze on his left arm. Every survival instinct in his body screamed at him to pull away, to maintain the impenetrable wall of ice he had built around his soul. Yet he could not move. The gentle, feather-light touch of her hands completely paralyzed him. Evelyn opened the medical kit. She took a cotton pad, soaked it in antiseptic, and began to carefully clean the wound on his arm. The sharp sting of the alcohol was nothing compared to the overwhelming intensity of her proximity. "You destroyed them, did you not?" Evelyn asked quietly, her eyes focused entirely on her delicate task. "The man who wanted to hurt us. The cartel. My father." "Yes," Dante whispered, this single word carrying the weight of 100 executions. "They are gone. Your father has been exiled. Marcus Kane is dead. The cartel operation is a graveyard. They will never touch you again." Evelyn's hand paused. She slowly looked up from his arm, her beautiful face illuminated by the soft, gray light filtering through the hallway windows. The traditional boundaries of morality dictated that she should condemn him. She was a civilian, a woman who had lived her entire life obeying the law. But the law had failed her. The law had left her bleeding in a rotting cabin. She reached up, her clean hand gently cupping his jaw. Her thumb brushed against a dark smear of blood on his cheekbone. "You told me you were a monster," Evelyn said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it rang louder than any gunshot he had heard that night. "You told me nobody leaves your world. But the light outside never kept us safe. If this is the dark, Dante, then the dark is warm enough for me." The last remaining shard of ice around Dante's heart shattered completely. He dropped his tactical restraint, his massive hands reaching up to grip her waist. He pulled her flush against his chest, ignoring the blood and the dirt, his dark eyes blazing with a fierce, possessive fire. He realized in that quiet, charged moment that he had not just saved her life. She had anchored his soul. The boundary between savior and devil disappeared entirely, leaving only a dangerous, unbreakable bond forged in the fires of their shared violence. The tender quiet of the morning shattered instantly. A piercing, high-pitched siren ripped through the grand halls of the Falcone estate, followed closely by the deep, concussive thud of an explosion at the outer perimeter. The Southern cartel was not entirely dead. The remnants, fueled by desperate vengeance over the slaughter at the shipping yards, had launched a massive, suicidal assault directly against Dante's heavily fortified home. Dante pulled away from Evelyn, the momentary warmth in his eyes vanishing as the apex predator resurfaced. The heavy mahogany doors burst open, and Matteo rushed in, his massive rifle already raised. They breached the south gate. Matteo shouted over the blaring alarms. 3 heavy transport trucks rammed the barricades. "We have 30 heavily armed men pushing toward the main courtyard." Dante grabbed a fresh weapon from the hidden armory panel in the wall. He turned to Evelyn, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Take Lily and go to the subterranean panic room in the west wing. Lock the blast door. Do not open it for anyone but me." Before she could reply, Dante and Matteo sprinted down the grand staircase, plunging straight into the escalating chaos. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire echoed through the bulletproof windows. Evelyn did not freeze. The fragile girl who had cowered in a rotting cabin was gone. She ran back into the medical suite, grabbed the encrypted laptop she had been working on, and scooped the sleeping Lily into her arms. The little girl woke up crying, terrified by the alarms, but Evelyn hushed her fiercely, carrying her down the secure servant corridors toward the west wing. They reached the panic room deep underground. The reinforced titanium door sealed shut behind them with a heavy, pressurized hiss. Lily huddled on the safe room floor, clutching her knees. Evelyn sat beside her, opening the laptop. The screen illuminated her determined face. She had spent hours analyzing the architectural blueprints of this entire estate. She knew every hallway, every blind spot, and every automated security countermeasure better than the men who built them. She tapped into the estate internal camera feed. The main courtyard was a war zone. Dante and his elite guards were holding the line, raining absolute destruction upon the invading cartel soldiers. But Evelyn noticed something terrifying on the secondary camera feeds. While the main force distracted Dante at the front, a specialized squad of 6 cartel assassins had scaled the eastern cliff face. They were bypassing the courtyard entirely. They had just breached the rear kitchen doors and were now moving silently through the mansion, heading straight for the subterranean levels. They were looking for hostages. Evelyn's fingers flew across the keyboard. She could not shoot a gun, but she controlled the house. This mansion was a fortress, and she was the architect who knew exactly how to trigger its jaws. The 6 assassins moved cautiously down the eastern corridor, their rifles raised. Evelyn accessed the environmental control systems. She waited until the entire squad crossed the threshold of the grand dining hall. Then, she executed her first command. Heavy steel security shutters slammed down over the windows and doors of the dining hall, plunging the assassins into pitch-black darkness. They shouted in confusion, firing blindly into the walls. Evelyn did not stop. She rerouted the mansion internal ventilation system, activating the emergency fire suppression protocols specifically for that sealed room. Thick, suffocating halon gas poured from the ceiling vents, starving the room of oxygen. 2 of the assassins collapsed within seconds, choking and gasping for air. The remaining 4 managed to blow open the interior kitchen door with the localized explosive, stumbling out into the hallway, coughing violently. But Evelyn was already 3 steps ahead. She tracked their movements through the thermal cameras. They were running toward the central staircase, hoping to flank Dante men from behind. Evelyn brought up the structural grid of the grand foyer. She knew the exact weight limitations of the decorative iron chandeliers and the automated lockdown sequences of the security gates. As the 4 surviving assassins sprinted beneath the massive crystal chandelier in the center hall, Evelyn triggered the ceiling release clamps. The enormous, 2-ton crystal structure plummeted from the ceiling, crushing 2 of the hitmen instantly under a mountain of shattered glass and twisted metal. The final 2 assassins stopped in sheer terror, realizing the house itself was actively hunting them. They panicked, turning to run back toward the eastern wing. Evelyn calmly isolated their location. She initiated the secondary lockdown sequence. Heavy titanium blast doors slid from the walls in front of them and behind them, trapping the 2 men entirely inside a narrow, reinforced transitional hallway. They screamed, slamming their fists against the bulletproof glass panels of the doors, completely neutralized and waiting for Dante to find them. Up in the main courtyard, the gunfire finally ceased. Dante stood amidst the smoking ruins of the cartel assault vehicles, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies. He wiped blood from his face, his chest heaving. He tapped his earpiece, demanding a status report from the interior guards, but static was his only answer. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped his heart. He sprinted back into the mansion, his rifle raised, expecting to find his home swarming with cartel assassins and Evelyn in danger. Instead, he found a perfectly silent mansion. He walked through the grand foyer, staring in absolute disbelief at the crushed assassins beneath the fallen chandelier. He moved to the eastern wing and saw the last two intruders trapped helplessly inside the titanium containment hallway, banging on the glass and begging for mercy. Dante lowered his weapon, his dark eyes wide with profound realization. He walked to the nearest security intercom panel on the wall and pressed the button. "Evelyn," he breathed, his deep voice echoing through the silent house. The intercom crackled to life. Her voice was steady, calm, and breathtakingly confident. "The eastern wing is secure, Dante. The secondary breach has been neutralized. Lily is safe." Dante stared at the trapped men behind the glass, then looked up at the closest security camera. A slow, incredibly dark smirk touched his lips, transforming his terrifying features into something magnificent. He had thought he needed to protect her from his world. He had been completely wrong. Evelyn Hayes was not a civilian needing a shield. She was a brilliant, lethal queen, and she had just defended her throne. The morning sun finally pierced the heavy gray clouds, casting a golden light over the sprawling Falcone estate. The shattered glass had been swept away, the breached doors replaced, and the remaining cartel forces completely eradicated. The violent war was over. Dante stood in his grand mahogany office, dressed in a pristine black shirt, his bruised knuckles the only visible reminder of the absolute destruction he had unleashed to protect his home. The heavy oak door clicked open. Evelyn walked in. She wore a simple white dress, her bruises fading, her posture radiating an undeniable, quiet strength. Dante turned to face her. He picked up a thick manila envelope from his polished desk and held it out. "It is finished," he said softly, his deep voice devoid of its usual lethal edge. "The cartel is gone. Your father is a ghost. There is no one left to hunt you." Evelyn walked slowly across the room and took the heavy envelope. She opened it, pulling out two sleek passports bearing new, flawless identities for her and her little sister. Beneath them was a secure bank ledger with enough funds to last a lifetime, and two first-class plane tickets to a quiet, beautiful city in Switzerland. "You are entirely free," Dante continued, his dark eyes masking a profound, hollow ache. "A private jet is waiting on the tarmac. You and Lily will leave this afternoon. You will live a clean, safe life, completely untouched by the violence of my world. I have fulfilled my end of the contract." Evelyn stared at the plane tickets. For years, she had desperately dreamed of an escape from her miserable reality. But as she looked up at the towering, terrifying man who had slaughtered monsters to keep her sister breathing, she realized a profound truth. The normal world had never been safe. The light had only offered lies, betrayal, and vulnerability. True safety was the shadow cast by Dante Falcone. Evelyn slowly raised her hands. With deliberate, unwavering precision, she tore the plane tickets exactly in half, letting the pieces flutter like snow onto the hardwood floor. Dante froze, a rare flicker of absolute shock crossing his sculpted features. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I am staying," Evelyn replied, stepping boldly into his personal space, her beautiful eyes blazing with fierce determination. "You told me nobody leaves the organization. I defended this house. I protected your men. I am already part of the dark, Dante, and I am never walking away from the only family that actually fought for me." Dante stared down into her defiant face. The iron control he had maintained for his entire life shattered completely. He pulled her flush against his solid chest, his large hands tangling in her dark hair, and captured her lips in a fierce, possessive kiss. It was a promise of absolute protection, a seal upon a bond forged in fire and blood. Evelyn kissed him back with equal desperation, anchoring her soul to the devil who had saved her. 2 weeks later, the sprawling gardens of the estate were bathed in warm afternoon sunlight. Lily sat cross-legged on the pristine grass, giggling brightly as the giant hitman, Matteo, purposefully let her win their third game of cards. Up on the grand balcony, Evelyn leaned back against Dante. His strong arms wrapped securely around her waist, his chin resting near her shoulder as they watched the little girl play in absolute safety. They had built a beautiful sanctuary on the ashes of their enemies, and in the heart of the underworld, they had finally found their permanent home. This powerful story brings us a profound lesson about the true meaning of family and resilience. Sometimes, true strength does not come from staying in the light, but from finding the absolute courage to face the darkness to protect the ones we love most. Family is not always bound by blood. It is defined by those who stand fiercely beside you when the rest of the world turns its back. Love and loyalty can blossom in the most broken, unexpected places, reminding us that even the deepest wounds can heal when we find the right place to belong. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice or rely on unexpected strength to protect the people you care about? Please share your thoughts and relate this journey to your own real-life experiences in the comments section below. We truly want to listen to the emotions and stories coming straight from your heart. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with your friends so you can listen to many more captivating stories every single day. We wish everyone watching this video abundant health, daily joy, and a life filled with absolute peace. Goodbye and see you in the next video.